You need to stop resisting and get on the ground.
I'm standing still with my hands visible.
You're being belligerent. Get down now.
Officer, I'm a sitting federal judge. You're making a serious mistake.
I don't care who you think you are. On the ground.
My hands are empty. I'm not a threat, and your camera is recording this.
Ma'am, you need to stop resisting and get on the ground. Resisting? I'm standing still with my hands. You're being belligerent. Get down now. Officer, I'm a sitting federal judge. You're making a serious mistake. I don't care who you think you are on the ground. My hands are empty. I'm not a threat, and your camera is recording this. But understand that every second of this is being recorded and you're violating established law. The parking lot security camera captured everything. Every word, every movement. And Officer David Hutchkins had absolutely no idea that the woman he was about to handcuff had spent the last 19 years sitting on the federal bench presiding over cases involving police misconduct, civil rights violations, and Fourth Amendment abuses. The woman standing next to the black Mercedes wasn't panicking. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She was Judge Kesha Langford, and she had sentenced corrupt police officers to prison. She had ruled on qualified immunity cases. She had written legal opinions that became binding precedent in 3 states. And now she was about to become the plaintiff in a lawsuit that would cost the city hundreds of thousands of dollars and end multiple careers. Before we dive deeper into this absolutely shocking story, I need you to do something. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. Your country, your state, wherever you are. And if you believe in holding authority figures accountable when they abuse their power, hit that subscribe music button. This story gets even more intense. You don't want to miss what happens next. Kesha Langford was not someone who expected special treatment. At 52 years old, she had been a federal judge for nearly 2 decades. She had handled death penalty cases, organized crime prosecutions, and complex civil rights litigation. She was fair, thorough, and known for holding both prosecutors and defense attorneys to the highest standards. That Saturday afternoon, Judge Langford had been shopping. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious, just a regular weekend errand run. She had gone to a high-end outdoor mall in La Jolla, purchased some items for her home, and was loading shopping bags into the trunk of her Mercedes when everything went wrong. The car was hers, properly registered with current tags. She had the key fob in her hand. She was dressed in casual weekend clothes, jeans, and a blazer. Nothing flashy. She was doing exactly what thousands of people do every day in parking lots across America. Loading purchases into a vehicle and preparing to leave. Then she heard the voice behind her. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle." Kesha turned around. A San Diego police officer was approaching her, hand on his service weapon, not drawn, but resting on it. A position of readiness. Officer David Hutchkins was 36 years old, 8 years on the force. And responding to what he thought was a suspicious person call, someone had reported a woman acting suspiciously near expensive vehicles in the parking lot. The description was vague. Black female medium build near a black Mercedes. That was it. No description of suspicious behavior. No report of attempted theft. Just a black woman near an expensive car. Hutchkins had decided that Kesha was the suspicious person. Kesha kept her hands visible, one still holding her key fob. "Is there a problem, officer? I need you to step away from the vehicle and show me some identification." Kesha's legal mind immediately recognized what was happening. This was a Fourth Amendment seizure. Hutchkins had detained her without reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. She had 2 choices: comply and sort it out later, or assert her rights immediately. She chose assertion. "Officer, I'm loading my own car with my own purchases. I have the key fob right here. What reasonable suspicion do you have that I'm engaged in criminal activity?" Hutchkins didn't like the question. Most people he stopped didn't ask questions. They just complied. "Ma'am, I'm investigating a suspicious person report." I need to see your ID. What specific suspicious behavior was reported? Kesha asked. Because loading shopping bags into a car isn't suspicious. It's normal. Someone called in a report. A report of what specifically? What crime do they believe was being committed? Hutchins's hand tightened on his weapon. Ma'am, you need to music cooperate. I am cooperating. I'm asking you to articulate the legal basis for this stop. That's not obstruction. That's my constitutional right. The confrontation was escalating. Other shoppers were starting to notice. Some slowed down to watch. One woman pulled out her phone and started recording from about 20 feet away. I'm not going to ask again, Hutchins said. Step away from the vehicle and provide identification. Kesha made a decision. She would comply under protest, document everything, and handle this through the proper legal channels. She had been a judge long enough to know that arguing with police in parking lots was dangerous, especially for Black Americans. Officer, I'm going to comply with your request, but I want to state clearly that this stop lacks reasonable suspicion and violates my Fourth Amendment rights. I'm reaching for my wallet now to retrieve my identification. She moved slowly, deliberately. Her hand stayed visible. She reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. Inside was her driver's license, music, her federal judge identification, her courthouse security credentials, her California bar showing she was a licensed attorney. She handed Hutchins her driver's license first. Hutchins looked at it. Kesha Langford. The address matched vehicle registration he could see through the windshield. This your car? He asked. Yes, prove it. Kesha held up the key fob and pressed the lock button. The car's lights flashed and the locks clicked. She pressed unlock. The lights flashed again and the locks opened. Satisfied? She asked. Hutchins should have apologized and left. He had detained someone loading their own vehicle with their own belongings. There was no crime, no violation, no reasonable suspicion. But Hutchins had a problem. He had made this stop in front of witnesses. He had escalated the confrontation, and backing down now would look like weakness. So he doubled down. You're being belligerent and uncooperative. I'm going to need you to wait here while I verify this information. Have you ever been detained by police for doing absolutely nothing wrong? Type yes or no in the comments. Kesha felt her anger rising, but she kept it controlled. Officer, I've provided identification. I've demonstrated ownership of the vehicle. There's no legal basis to continue this detention. Am I free to go? No. You need to wait while I run your information. On what grounds? On the grounds that I'm conducting an investigation. An investigation into what crime? Hutchins didn't answer. He walked back to his patrol car with Kesha's license. Kesha stood next to her Mercedes, hands visible, waiting. She looked at the woman who was recording and gave a small nod. Keep recording, the nod said. This matters. Hutchins sat in his patrol car, running Kesha's license through the system. It came back clean. No warrants, no criminal history, perfect driving record. The registered owner of the vehicle matched the license. Everything checked out. Hutchins should have returned the license, apologized for the confusion, and let Kesha go. But he had a bigger problem now. He had made a bad stop and continued it past the point of reasonless. He needed to find something to justify his actions. He got out of his patrol car and approached Kesha again. Ma'am, I'm going to need to search your vehicle. Kesha's eyes narrowed. On what basis? I have reasonable suspicion that there may be stolen merchandise in the vehicle. Based on what? I have receipts for everything I purchased. The bag's music are from stores in this mall. Your reasonable suspicion is based on what specific articulable facts? Hutchins was trapped. He had no facts. He had a vague suspicious person report and his own assumptions. That's not reasonable suspicion. That's not probable cause. That's bias. Ma'am, you're being uncooperative. That gives me reasonable suspicion. Kesha almost laughed. No, officer, it doesn't. Asserting my constitutional rights is not evidence of criminal activity. Arizona v. Johnson establishes that clearly. You cannot use my refusal to consent to a search as justification for reasonable suspicion. Hutchins's face flushed. Are you a lawyer? I'm a federal judge. The parking lot seemed to go quiet. Even the background noise of traffic and shoppers seemed to fade for a moment. Hutchins stared at her. You're a what? A federal judge. United States District Music Court, Southern District of California. I've been on the bench for 19 years, and you've just violated my Fourth Amendment rights in a way that is so clearly established music that you won't be able to claim qualified immunity. Hutchins's hand moved away from his weapon. His posture changed for the first time since the encounter began. Uncertainty crossed his face. I need to see proof of that. Kesha reached back into her wallet and pulled out her federal credentials. The official United States Court's identification with her photograph. Her name, her title, and the seal of the federal judiciary. Hutchins took the credentials and studied them. His hands were shaking slightly. This could be fake, he said, but his voice had lost its authority. Music, call the federal courthouse. The main number is public. Ask for Chambers. They'll confirm my identity. The woman who had been recording spoke up from her position 20 feet away. I've got all of this on video. She called out, everything. Hutchins looked at her, then back at Kesha. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step away from the vehicle. We're past that point, officer, Kesha said calmly. You've already detained me unlawfully. You've continued the detention past any reasonable time frame. You've requested a search without probable cause, and now you're escalating because you've realized you made a mistake. What you should do right now is return my identification, apologize, and call your supervisor. I don't have to do anything. Actually, you do, because I'm not just going to file a complaint. I'm going to file a federal lawsuit. And every decision you make in the next 60 seconds is going to be evidence in that music lawsuit. Hutchins made his worst decision of the day. Instead of de-escalating, instead of calling a supervisor, instead of admitting the mistake and trying to minimize the damage, he decided to assert his authority. Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for what? Interfering with the police investigation. There is no investigation. Music, there's an officer who saw a black woman in an expensive car and made assumptions. But if you're going to arrest me, do it. The video is rolling. My credentials are in your hand, and you're about to make the biggest mistake of your career. Do you think the officer should have just apologized and walked away at this point? Let me know below. Hutchins pulled out his handcuffs. Kesha turned around slowly. She placed her hands behind her back. The metal cuffs clicked around her wrists. The woman recording the incident was talking on her phone now, presumably calling someone. Other shoppers had stopped to watch. A small crowd was forming. What's happening? Someone asked. The police are arresting a federal judge for loading groceries into her own car. Music, another person answered. Hutchins walked Kesha to his patrol car. She didn't resist. She didn't argue. She just walked calmly. Her head held high, her expression unreadable. He placed her in the back seat of the patrol car. The plastic seat was hard and uncomfortable. The car smelled like stale coffee and the chemical cleaner they used on the seats. Kesha sat perfectly still. Her mind was already working through the legal strategy. What claims to file? What evidence to preserve? What witnesses to contact? Hutchins got in the front seat and sat there for a moment. He picked up his radio, then put it down, picked it up again, put it down again. He knew he had made a mistake, a catastrophic mistake. But he had committed to the arrest. There was no way to undo it now without looking incompetent. He started the car and drove to the police station. The drive took 11 minutes. Music greater than he didn't say a word. Kesha didn't either. When they arrived at the station, Hutchins brought Kesha inside. Other officers looked up from their work. They saw a well-dressed black woman in handcuffs and didn't think much of it initially. Hutchins took Kesha to the processing area. A female officer named Carmen Rodriguez was assigned to process her. Rodriguez was a 12-year veteran who had seen everything. Rodriguez started the standard booking procedure. Personal belongings removed and cataloged. Phone, keys, wallet, jewelry. When Rodriguez opened the wallet, she saw the federal judge credentials immediately. She looked at the ID card, looked at Kesha, looked at Hutchins. "Where did you arrest her?" Rodriguez asked quietly. "Parking lot of the mall in La Jolla." "What was she doing?" "Loading shopping bags into her car." Rodriguez's expression didn't change, but her eyes went hard. "What were the charges?" "Interfering with an investigation." "What investigation?" "Suspicious person report." Rodriguez held up the federal credentials. "Did you verify these?" "I think they might be fake." Rodriguez had processed thousands of arrests. Music, she had seen every kind of fake credential that criminals could produce. These weren't fake. The holographic seal, the microprinting, the weight and texture. These were real federal court credentials. She stepped away from the processing desk and walked directly to her watch commander's office. Lieutenant Marcus Freeman had been with the San Diego Police Department for 21 years. He had handled difficult situations. He had managed controversial arrests. But when Rodriguez walked into his office holding federal judge credentials, his stomach dropped. "Where's the person these belong to?" Freeman asked. "Processing area." Hutchins brought her in, arrested her for interfering with an investigation. Freeman stood up immediately. He walked to the processing area and looked at Kesha sitting calmly in the holding chair. He looked at the credentials again. He walked to his office, closed the door, and made a phone call. The call went to the duty assistant chief. The conversation lasted 3 minutes. When Freeman hung up, he looked like he had aged 5 years. He walked back to the processing area. "Judge Langford, I'm Lieutenant Freeman. I apologize for this situation. You're being released immediately." "What was I being charged with?" Kesha asked. "That's being reviewed. I want everything in writing. The initial call report, the body camera footage, the dash cam footage, the booking report. Officer Hutchins' written statement of probable cause. Everything?" Freeman nodded. "We'll have those ready for you." "How long will that take?" "We can have digital copies ready within 24 hours. I want them tonight." There was no room for negotiation in Kesha's voice. Freeman recognized the tone. He had heard it in court before. The tone of a judge who had made a ruling and expected compliance. "I'll make sure you have them tonight." Kesha was uncuffed. Her belongings were returned. She was escorted out of the station by Lieutenant Freeman himself, who apologized 3 more times before she got in the Uber she had called. Kesha arrived home at 6:47 in the evening. She had been detained for 2 hours and 33 minutes. She sat in her living room for a long moment, processing what had happened. Then she picked up her phone and started making calls. The first call went to the Chief Judge of the Southern District of California. The second call went to her longtime friend who practiced civil rights law. The third call went to the American Civil Liberties Union. By Monday music morning, the incident was being discussed at the highest levels of both the federal court system and the San Diego Police Department. The chief of police personally called Kesha to apologize. She listened politely and said she would be filing a federal lawsuit regardless. The lawsuit was filed on Wednesday, 23 pages, single-spaced, with citations to Supreme Court cases and references to specific timestamps in the video footage and body camera recordings. The lawsuit alleged unlawful detention, unlawful arrest, violation of Fourth Amendment rights, violation of 14th Amendment equal protection rights, and racial profiling. It named Officer Hudgens individually and the City of San Diego. The city attorney's office reviewed the case. They watched the parking lot security footage. They watched the body camera footage. They read the lawsuit. Then they called an emergency meeting with the police chief and the city manager. "This is indefensible," the city attorney said bluntly. "We detained a federal judge for loading her own car. The video shows it clearly. We have no legal defense. We need to settle." But before settlement negotiations could begin, the story leaked to the media. Local news picked it up first, then national outlets, then legal publications. "Federal judge arrested while shopping" became a headline that spread across the country. The video from the woman in the parking lot was posted online. Within 24 hours, it had 3 million views. Within a week, it had been viewed over 15 million times. The comment sections exploded. People shared their own stories of being profiled. Legal experts broke down every violation Hudgens had committed. Civil rights organizations use it as evidence of systemic problems in policing. The San Diego Police Department opened an internal investigation. They assigned their most senior internal affairs investigator to the case. The investigation took for weeks. They interviewed Hudgens multiple times. They reviewed every second of available footage. They analyzed the suspicious person call that had initiated everything. The findings were damning. The suspicious person call had been made by a mall security guard who had later admitted he thought Kesha looked out of place near expensive cars. When pressed on what that meant, he couldn't articulate any specific suspicious behavior, just a feeling. Hudgens had responded to that vague call and immediately focused on Kesha based on race. He had detained her without reasonable suspicion. He had continued the detention past any reasonable time frame. He had requested a search without probable cause. He had arrested her for asserting her constitutional rights. Every single action he took was a violation of department policy and constitutional law. The investigation also found patterns in Hudgens' history. Over the previous 3 years, Hudgens had made stops involving black motorists at a rate 2.8 times higher than the department average. His searches of black motorists were 3.4 times higher. His arrest rates showed similar disparities. The pattern had been there for years. Nobody had looked at the data. Nobody had connected the dots. Officer David Hudgens was terminated 6 weeks after the incident. Music, the termination letter cited multiple violations: unlawful detention, unlawful arrest, racial profiling, violation of department policy. Music conduct, unbecoming an officer. Hudgens tried to appeal. His union representative reviewed the footage and told him the same thing everyone else was telling him: "You're finished. The video is too clear. The victim is too credible. The violations are too obvious." Hudgens withdrew his appeal, but his termination was just the beginning of the consequences. The Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, opened an investigation into the San Diego Police Department's stop and search practices. They wanted to know if Hudgens' bias was isolated or symptomatic of larger problems. The investigation took 8 months. They analyzed 5 years of stop data. They reviewed thousands of police reports. They interviewed dozens of officers and community members. Their findings were released in a 97-page report. Black residents were stopped at rates significantly higher than white residents, even after controlling for crime rates and population. Black motorists were searched at rates 3 times higher, despite being less likely to be found with contraband. The San Diego Police Department entered into a consent decree with the Department of Justice. The reforms were comprehensive. Mandatory implicit bias training for all officers. Early warning system for officers with problematic patterns. Civilian oversight board with real authority. Regular audits of stop data by race. Body camera requirement for all uniformed officers and federal monitoring for 3 years. Kesha's lawsuit settled 9 months after the incident. The settlement amount was never publicly disclosed, but sources familiar with the negotiations said it was $675,000. Kesha donated the entire settlement to civil rights organizations working on police reform. "I don't need the money," she told reporters in her only public statement about the incident. "I need the system to change. I need other people who don't have my resources and position to be protected from what happened to me." The parking lot security footage became required viewing at police meets across California. It was used in constitutional law classes. Civil rights organizations used it in community education sessions. One 2-hour detention in a parking lot led to a terminated career. A $675,000 settlement, a federal consent decree. Music and systemic reforms that affected how an entire police department operated. David Hudgens never worked in law enforcement again. His termination for cause made him unhireable to other agencies. He tried private security work, but couldn't maintain employment. He eventually left California entirely. He gave one interview to a local news outlet, claiming he had been following his training and music, that the judge had been uncooperative. The interviewer asked him if he had watched the footage. Music Hutchins said he had. The interviewer asked him what specific suspicious behavior Kesha had music engaged in. Hutchins couldn't answer. Kesha Langford returned to the bench. She continued presiding over cases, including several involving police misconduct. Music colleagues said the experience made her even more attuned to civil rights issues in her courtroom. In private conversations with other judges, Kesha has said that what happened to her wasn't unique. It was just documented. She said thousands of Black music Americans experience similar treatment every day. But they don't have federal credentials. They don't have legal knowledge, and they don't have the resources to fight back. That's why she pushed for the footage to be made public and why she donated the settlement. So, the incident could become a teaching moment so people could see what racial profiling music looks like. So officers could learn that assumptions aren't evidence and bias isn't reasonable suspicion. The security camera footage is still online. You can watch music it yourself. You can see a federal judge calmly asserting her rights while being detained for the crime of shopping while Black. You can see the moment Hutchins realizes what he's done. You can see what accountability looks like when the system actually works. What's your biggest takeaway from this music story? Drop it in the comments below. And if this opened your eyes to the reality of racial profiling, make sure you're subscribed because we tell stories that need to be heard. This story music matters because Kesha Langford had every advantage. She had legal knowledge. She had credentials. She had position and authority. And she still got handcuffed in a parking lot for loading shopping bags music into her own car. Think about everyone who doesn't have those advantages. Everyone who gets stopped and music searched based on assumptions. Everyone who gets arrested for asserting their rights. Everyone who doesn't have the knowledge or resources to fight back. Kesha's story shows that even when you have every advantage, music bias can still affect you. But it also shows that accountability is possible, that the system can work, that music consequences can follow violations. Not every unlawful detention ends with justice. Not every case of racial profiling leads to music termination and reform, but this one did, and that matters. Thanks for watching this story all the way through. If this made you think differently about police accountability and racial profiling, share it with someone who needs to see it. Hit music subscribe if you haven't already. We're going to keep bringing you stories that matter. Drop a comment. Do you